Morning, Rabbi.
Shalom.
Shalom Aleichem.
All right, let's hope the machines work today. Yesterday, the only thing that worked was the Zoom. And I have no idea.
Wow. Do you redo it when it's like that?
No, I didn't redo it because we're doing this twice. By the Gemara, I would redo it. Chaim.
Joy.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Chevra.
Morning. Morning.
Okay, Shmuel, you want to give up? Press the button over here. Nice and gentle.
You never say that gentle word.
An error. Give me a second, guys. Noch a segunde. There's precious over here. Too many machines that have to work. But you want to press it again because we can take it out and then we need another second for this to upload again. Couldn't go work. Let me just reopen everything. This guy over here. Okay, Nachamo, want to press that? And it is what it is. Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Hilchos, Melachim, Melachim Isayim, Prakim, Zayin, Ches, and Tes. We are beginning with Perek Zayin. Perek Zayin is speaking both about the Kohen Mashuach Melchama, as we'll explain what that means, as well as the few people that are exempt from army service. The sugyas that we will be learning is based on Soita, Daf Mem Gimel, Daf Mem Beis, Daf Mem Gimel, and other places throughout Shas. And Perek Zayin has 15 halachas, beginning with halacha Aleph, says that Rambam. Echad Melchemes Mitzvah. The Echad Melchemes Arishus. The following is applicable both, as we explained yesterday, to Melchemes Mitzvah, the three wars, Shiva Samamim, Amalek, in any defensive war, and with the Rishus of the Sanhedrin, any war to add to the territory of the Holy Land, says the Rambam, for both of these wars, Maman and Kohen, we would appoint a Kohen to address, to inspire the people during battle, actually before battle. And as we'll see, there were two times that the Kohen, Meshuach Melchama, addressed the troops. And he is appointed through being anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha when we had the Shemen HaMishcha. And this Kohen is called the one that was anointed, but for the mitzvah of speaking to the troops prior to going to battle. Says Rambam Halacha Beis. Twice would he speak to the troops prior to battle. One, the first time at the border, as the army is leaving, right? This is way before they are assuming battle positions. And then people who would open up a chumash would mamash appreciate how the Rambam is taking the psukim. And the first address, he's quoting, this is at the end of Shoftim, the Varim Chav, Pasuk Vav, Psukim Vav and Zayin. He says the words from the verbatim, etc., etc. And the people, the individuals that fit into those categories of exemptions, as the Rambam will specify in a moment, indeed, then they should retreat from the battlefront. That's time number one. Time number 2, notes when the army already assumed its battle position, means mamish prior to engaging with the enemy, this kind again would address the people. And here, Ramam is quoting psukim that we have in the same parsha, but prior to the ones he quoted before. Psukim Gimel and Dalet. Al tiru v'al tachbezu, don't be afraid, don't panic, etc. How beautiful is Torah Shabbal Peh. In other words, the order that they are in the Chumash, for a reason, of course, is mamish out of the order of the way they were quoted. Halacha Gimel. And the armies are assuming battle positions. Again, right before they are going to engage with the enemy. The Mashuach Milchama will stand on an elevated place. Facing the army, and he would say the words as they are written in the holy tongue. Shema, in quoting Shema Yisrael, Atem Karev Mayoim LaMilchama, right? The way Chassidus emphasizes. We're not going to war with our enemies. We're going to war with the knowledge that we are already above our enemies. Al Yerach Levavchem, don't be afraid. Val Tidu, don't panic. Don't be faint-hearted. Val Tachbezu, don't panic. Val Tartzum Ifneim, do not break ranks. And why is that? Ki Hashem Elokeichem ha'yelechim achem, li'ilachem lachem imavechem l'shia eschem. And these are the psukim that we quoted before, both psukim Gimel and Daled. We're speaking about the second talk that he gave to the people. Ad kan oimer Mashuach Milchama. Now, what's amazing, and this is not written explicitly in the Chumash, is that together with the Mashuach Milchama, there was another kohen that would repeat what he said. The kohen achar tachtav mashmiya l'chol ha'am b'koil ram. Now, it doesn't mean that the Mashuach Milchama spoke in a silent voice. No, he spoke on an elevated place. But there was like the talk, and then there was the one who repeated it very similar later, right? The whole idea of an Amoida is that when the great Chachamim would speak, they would speak B'lashon HaKodesh, and then there would be someone on their side speaking it out loud to all of the people. Now, so he spoke, it was given over again. I think that the Kohen Achad didn't always speak B'lashon HaKodesh. He was able to speak any way he felt, but he would repeat the words. And then, now we're going on to say, and now the Mashuach Milchama would say, now we're going back to Psukim, we're going continuing, Psukim Hevav Zayin, Mi Ha'ish, Asher Bana Bayis Chodosh, is there a man that built a new house, V'loi Chanochi, and it did not yet inaugurate it? Because if there is such a man, Yelech V'yoshem L'beisoi, let him go back home, Penyamos B'Milchama, because lest he die in battle and another man will go and inaugurate his house. That's the first category of an exemption. Number 2, person who planted a vineyard. Guys, chilulei means, as we know, that the first 3 years, the produce is arla. But on the 4th year, one can benefit from it. Now, you can't just eat it. If it's planted in the Holy Land, it's called netaravoy, right? You have to redeem it. Either take it to Yerushalayim or redeem it for money. That's what we're talking about. If there was a person that didn't yet even enter the 4th year, he didn't have an opportunity to do any chilul of his kerem. Let him go back home. And category number 3, if a man already gave kedushin to a woman, but he did not take her into the chuppah yet, he also many people confuse this, Shmuel, with someone who's already in the Shaina. And as the Rambam will make it beautifully clear, that people that are in the 1st year, and likewise they are already in the 4th year by the Kedem, or they are in the 1st year that they are living in their home, they lechatchila don't even go. Here we're speaking about people that didn't even begin, right? He built a house, he never entered the house, he never began the 4th year of the Kedem, he never married her. He would go, and then the Kohen will tell him, go back. Atkan Mashuach Milchama Medaber. And here again, the shoiter that I'm here doesn't call a kohen acher. The shoiter means an officer. Mashmiya l'cholam l'koldam would repeat everything this kohen Mashuach Milchama said in a loud voice, and then he would add. And now he says on his own pasuk ches. And here again, even though the pasuk ches telling people who are faint-hearted should go back home was not said by the kohen Mashuach Milchama, but everything that was said needed to be repeated by someone else. Now you know exactly how this happened. We're speaking, this was the details about the second talk. And the second talk is given when they are already in battle position. Some people would retreat. Shmuel, think about it. When people retreat, you have to reorganize the troops. That's what the Rambam is saying. You have to array everyone again. And you appoint people to get in their positions. The ones leading will stand in front. So aside of having the leaders standing in front of the troops, but also behind every single group of soldiers, they placed shoitrim chazakim ba'azim, very powerful soldiers, v'kashilin shel barzel b'yodeyim, with iron axes in their hands. Why? Because if anyone after this point, they were told already, whoever is fear, right? Whoever's faint-hearted should go back. You had your opportunity. Now that we are going to start the battle, if anyone is going to flee, these shoitrim had the right to cut their legs off. And why is that so important? Because that no one should run back to the point that they can be killed is because flight is the beginning of defeat, and it's contagious. So if soldier number 2 will see soldier number 1 running back in a disorganized fashion, that's going to inspire fear amongst everyone. And that, God forbid, will lead to defeat. And to stop that, you can kill them. All of these exemptions, according to the Rambam, notes the speech that the Rambam spoke out before, inspiring people, Shema Yisrael, don't be afraid, God is with us, God is going to win the battle. That's spoken in all wars. But the exemptions were only given, according to the Rambam, b'molchemes reshus. If the battle is in the category of reshus, abo b'molchemes mitzvah, then hakoil yoitzim, everyone is obligated to take part of the army. Afilu chasen b'chedre v'kala mechupasa. Wow. Even though then, I don't know how common it was for a woman to be standing in the front lines, but whatever was needed, the supply chain, however they employed women then, men and women were obligated to join the ranks.
Doesn't it sound in Dalit that it's a little bit like contradictory? Hey, God is with us. We're going to win. We're going to win. Everyone go home, which is not a normal thing in battle. Like if you're feared, you go home. But then we're worried about like a guy who's going to stand in the back, and that's going to make it happen.
No. Once the battle begins, no one can leave anymore. Now, let's go into more details of these people who were told that they can go back, that are given exemptions. It doesn't only refer to someone who built a normal home in which he plans to live in, but even haboina beis habakar. Wow, a person built a barn for one's cattle, or a beis ha'etzim, a woodshed, or any type of beis ha'etzim, any type of storage house. Here's the key: since one, if need be, can move in there and live there themselves. In other words, it's a structure that's fit for dwelling. They are given the same exemption. Furthermore, it doesn't only refer to the one who actually built it. What about someone who bought? He bought a house. Same concept. Even though he didn't build it, for him it's new. Or someone who didn't buy it, someone who received it as a gift. Or someone who was Yoidish. All of these cases, if they did not yet move in, then he's included in that exemption. Now, what are we excluding now? Now, guys, there's a machlokes whether we have the words Beis Teven, asylum, whether it's in, whether it's out, or Beishan, a gatehouse. Guys, a gatehouse is a watchman's booth that normally was placed outside a courtyard, or a achsadra. An achsadra was a structure that had 4 walls with no roof at all, or a merpeses, what we would call a porch. So it doesn't even have 6 by 6 feet. Or if a person stole a house, these peoples are not given that exemption. Halacha Vav, going into the definition of planting a vineyard. Whether it is you planted a vineyard, or if you planted any orchard. What makes trees into an orchard? 5. And the 5 fruit trees don't even have to be of the same type. And furthermore, let's go back to the vineyard, whether it is that you planted the vineyard, or whether it is that you were mavrich or marking different ways. once you already have vines, sometimes you would take the edge of the vine and stick it into the ground, bend it over into the ground, and it would become, so to say, its own strong tree, its own strong vine. Or if you would graft one into the other. The details that we don't have to go through right now, sometimes doing an act of mavrich or markiv, halacha won't consider it to be something new. And therefore, the produce that grows from it are not considered as arla. But if you did it in a way where now, if anything will grow from it, when things grow from it, it's considered arla, that's considered new. How many of them? 5 of them. Or again, you don't have to be the one that planted it. What happens if you purchased it? So it's new for you. Or if someone inherited it, or if someone received it as a gift. All of these are included in the exception of whoever was not the kedem. Now, what that is included? What's excluded? If a person planted 4 fruit trees, or even if he planted 5 trees, but they are barren, or God forbid, if a person stole a vineyard, furthermore, says the Rambam, if you have 2 partners or more partners, right, that planted or bought a vineyard, they are also excluded from this exemption, because we view partnership as each partner having part in all of the parts. And the Kesef Mishnah adds something important, that no matter how you understand the lumdus of partnerships, if 2 partners have a house, even again, legally everyone owns every part of it. But since de facto, the halach yelech of owning a house in partnership is that there will be one location in the house that will be used exclusively by one partner. That's the way they are understood. And the other one will use his corner in the house. So since each one has their own part in the house, they are included in the exemption. It's only by a field, by a vineyard, that the way people behaved as partners was everyone had part in all of the land that they own together. Halacha zayin. Let's go now to the 3rd exemption that the Torah speaks about. Right, so echat ha'ma'aris, whether it's someone who consecrated a psula, a woman that was never married prior, the echat ha'ma'aris is almana, makes no difference, right? The key is as long as they were never married together, because sometimes you can have a person that married a woman, divorced a woman, and remarried her if he's not a kohen. We're not speaking about that. We're speaking about someone that was never with. Furthermore, look at this. Wow. If you have a case of a man having a connection to a woman through what we call a zika, and this is true even, let's say, Reuven was married to a woman, and Reuven passed away without having any children, and Reuven left 5 brothers, afilo chamisha achim, and we all know that only one of the 5, ideally the oldest one, will be the one to consummate, to make the yibum. Doesn't matter who will end up doing it. As long as no one did, neither Yibum nor Chalitza, the din is all of them are given the exemption. Because everyone is Ra'ui to become her husband, and they didn't yet consummate it, and there was a connection already. Another case, and these cases go back to the dinim of Tanoim that we don't practice nowadays, but a person is allowed to be Mekadosh a woman al Tanai. You have all different types of stipulations. You have a Tanai that only when the Tanai will the Kedushin go into effect. And then you have another type of stipulation that when the condition is met, the Kedushin goes back retroactively. So Kiddush Isha, may achshav la'achar shnei masor chodesh, if the stipulation was made, that when the stipulation is made, it will retroactively be effective. In other words, even though that now it didn't go into effect, but after 12 months, it's going to retroactively be effective, which means the key what we're looking for is that for the Kedushin to be in effect prior to this battle. The Sholem Hazman B'Milchama, during that 1 year, it's time to go to battle. This Chassan is also allowed to go back. Because when 12 months will hit, then retroactively is going to become Nikodeshes. Comes out that the Kedushin at some point later, retroactively, would have begun prior to the battle. But guys, you understand that, David? Masha Enkin, if a person doesn't use the words Meyachshav or Almanas, if he makes a stipulation that only goes into effect after the stipulation is met, no, if the war begun before the Kedushin, then there is no exemption. Halacha ches. Hamachzer is Kedushas. A person is remarrying the woman who he divorced. Hama'aris Isa, or if a man gave Kedushin to a woman to whom halachically he may not, And we know that sometimes the Kedushin is not even Chal. We're not speaking about that. We're speaking about cases where the Isur is the Isur Lav, the Kedushin is Chal, but it's also. For example, a Kohen Gadol gave Kedushin to a Almana, or a Kohen Hedyot gave Kedushin to a woman who was already a divorcee, to whom biblically he may not marry, or to a woman who underwent Chalitza, to whom rabbinically he may not marry, or a Mamzeres and an Asina to a Yisrael. We'll speak about that when we learn the dinim of the details. Bas Yisrael, a Mamzer, and a Sin. In all of these cases, even though the Kedushin is Chal, since they may not be together, and really he should give her a get, so then Einer Chayzer, the exemption is not given to him. Halacha tes. Kol elu shechayzer me'elchei amacham. All of those who fall into the category, to the general three categories that we spoke about, aside of the last one of Miho Ish Hayari V'Rachaleva. Kishashoymem as Divrei HaKoyin, even though they are allowed to chayzer, they can go back from being up front in the battle, but they don't go back home. They don't go back home. They are obligated to be in service of the army during battle. And primarily what we need is we need to have a proper supply chain, which is so important. You can have the greatest soldiers, but if you can't get fuel to them, you can't get food to them, then they won't be able to do anything. Umisapkin, and they're going to supply the water and the food, la'anshe yatzava, as well as to be misakin the drachim if need be to fix the roads. That's very important. So it's also a good thing to have. It's not that they're going to go back home. It's that they won't be in the front line. Now comes halacha yud, and so many people confused. Halacha, right now we quoted Psukim and Parsha Shoyf, and the Torah clearly spoke about, like just an example, a person gave kedushin, but he didn't even make nesuyin yet, right? He built a house, he didn't move in yet. Now there's another category. The other category is very similar, but it's not the same. Halacha yud. The following they should not go to begin with. Up until now, everyone was obligated to be there, and they were given an option to. They were told go back. The following should never go there. Nor will we ever bother them with any sort of communal obligation. And that is number one. It's similar but not the same. Right? A person who not only built a house, but he's within the first year, and he already entered. We'll define what that means. A person who already went to chuppah, he got married to the woman whom he consecrated prior to the chuppah. Or if a person already did the yibum, or karma, he began to use the product of the fourth year, which could not have been eaten stam, but he already redeemed it to take the money to eat in Yerushalayim. Here, till the end of what we call Shana Rishayna, they don't go out at all. In other words, up until now, they went out, they were told they can fall back, but they fell back from being in the front line. But they needed to be in service of. Here, they don't go at all, they stay home. As it says, now we're quoting Psukim in a different parsha. He says, Noki Yela Beisoy. Noki means rain, free. He's free. In order for him to be in his Beisoy. Shana Achas, in order for the Simeches Ishtoi. Now, from oral tradition, we learned that Sheyia Naki Shana Bein Labai Shakana, even though the Torah speaks about Leishtoi, right? You can argue it's only there. No, by oral tradition, we know that this verse refers side to the person that built a house or a house that he bought, whether we're referring to someone explicitly that married a woman, and the Rambam wants to make it clear again, not only does he not go, Naki means free, halacha yud aleph, kol hashana kula, for that first year, ein misapik mayim hamazon. He's not even conscripted to be supplying the chain of necessities. He won't be told to fix the roads. He doesn't have to guard the walls. He won't be obligated to pay taxes to add beams in the city walls. He's exempt from everything. There is no duties that he will be assigned in. As it says, in other words, that's why the Torah says two things. Not batzava, not l'chol davar. L'chol davar means, like we said, taxes to build a wall. And the Rambam, it's not one or the other. It ends up being two lav, because the Torah says kol davar. So if he was taxed, or if he was told to go to the army, then he violated two lavin, because he went to the tzava and it's the davar. Halacha yud beis. Now again, details in defining moving in. What happens if a person built a house, but it's an income property? He rented it out. So now it depends. If the tenant, prior to moving in, he paid rent up front, then not 1 month, the whole year's rent. If he already received the whole year's rent, even though the tenant didn't live there, but he got the money for it, he already had the usufruct of a year. That's it. He lost his exemption. Now not only will he have to go to the battle, but he won't even give him the exemption to fall back. But if the tenant moved in, but he will only receive the rent after 12 months, it's as if he did not benefit from it at all. 1 second. That's if he didn't benefit from all, then what? Then he has to go to the front, and he's told that he can fall back a little bit. You understand? And if he got paid 1 month of it, then it's as if he moved in there only for 1 month.
Paying after 12 months.
If he didn't get any payment, then it's like a person who built a house who didn't move in. Look, that we learned at the beginning of today's payment. If he got paid the whole 12 months, he's mochoy like everyone else. If he got paid for 1 day, for 1 week, for 1 month, for 11 months, so then he's in the category of halacha yud, the greatest exemption. Halacha yud gimel. Bana bayis, if he built a home, v'nasan boy chafatzav, he put his stuff in, v'nol aleim, and he locked the doors. Is that called moving in? He didn't move in, his things moved in. Look at the Rambam. If he needed to spend time guarding them, to spend money guarding them, in other words, that's called moved in. And once you begin living in the house, you're given that full exemption for a full year from when you started to pay for a guard. Or maybe from when you moved your stuff. The fact that you needed to hire a guard means you moved. But if the scenario is where you don't have to hire anyone to guard that which you moved in there, again, the huge difference. If that's the beginning of today's pay. Then you have to go, and you're told that you don't have to be in the front. You can fall back to be the supply chain people. If you entered, but it's not a full year, then you don't go lechatchil. Halacha yudal. See, when you learn Chumash, you don't get this. The Rambam always gives you the big picture. It's Kamal. Look at the Rambam. Not marriage. Marriage doesn't make a difference where, but the house and the vineyard and the exemptions that they bring on all levels is only if it is in the Holy Land. And if it's in the Chutz La'aretz, ein chayzer aleim. Final halacha tezvav. When the final statement that we learned that the shoiter made, not even the kaim shoach malchama, right? That was pasuk ches. Tamiho ish hayarim. Guys, you remember we learned this. Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Machlekes. What does that mean? So the Rambam paskins like Rabbi Akiva. That verse means whoever is fearful, whoever is faint. Kemashmoy. She'ein beliboy koyach la'amay b'kishtayam malchama. If you remember, Rabbi Yossi Aglili explains that the pasuk is referring to people that are afraid because of the sins that they made, which really it was addressed by the opening statement when the Kohen says Shema Yisrael. Rashi says that Yidden should know that just in the schus of us saying Shema twice a day, that alone God will protect us. But anyways, Rambam paskins that the shoiter is telling people before the end, before the engagement, if you are faint-hearted, please leave. So you were given an option at that moment. Now, so that was told, that was the last exemption that was given. And at that moment, whoever felt they can't take engaging in battle, we're told they can leave. But the moment you enter into the throes of battle, from then on, everyone, Yishoin al mikveh Yisrael, we have to rely on, mikveh means hope from kaveh. We have to rely on the hope of Yisrael, on God Almighty, and on the Savior of Israel, who's always here, when we are in a time of need. And we have to know that we are fighting for the sake of Hashem's oneness. And B'yasim, Hashem's oneness, as we'll see in the next few prakim, that wherever we took over, everyone there needed to undertake the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. So we brought about the oneness of God everywhere. B'yasim nafshay b'chapim, we should place our life in God's palm. V'lo yira, v'lo yivcha, v'lo yachshay, v'lo be'ishtoi, v'lo be'banav. Don't think about your personal life. Erase, wipe their memory from your heart. In order for you to focus on the Melchama. A soldier who brings upon, if you, at the moment, like the Alter Rebbe says, the first machshava, you're not going to be held guilty, a benini. But if you're going to give continuity to it, and you're going to focus on your anxiety and you worry, in the middle of the battle, you are violating a negative commandment, as it says, Al Yerach Levavchem, right? Don't be faint-hearted. Al Tiru, don't be afraid. Don't panic. Don't break ranks. And furthermore, if a person is going to focus and therefore he will begin to experience his fear, if that will bring about the bloodshed, he will be held accountable for. And the nitzach here means not the results. The results is in the hands of God. Nitzach means if I'm not valiant, if I'm not fighting with all of my midas hanitzach, if I'm not doing that which is in my hand, as if I spilled everyone's blood. As it says, one who won't fight with all of their midas hanitzach will demoralize the hearts of their brethren. It says in Yirmiyahu, like Kabbalah means nach, Nevi'im, not nach. Nevi'im and Megillah Esther, Arur oisem melachas Hashem rimiyah. Cursed is the person who does God's work deceitfully, referring to this. Moineya, v'arur, well, that goes generally. And v'arur moineya charba midam. Cursed is the person who withholds a sword from blood. That refers to the soldier who is not fighting with all of his midas hanitzach. Now, in the positive, whoever fights with his entire heart, and his intention is to sanctify God's name, says Rambam Muftach, he's guaranteed that he will find no harm, nor any bad will overtake him. And he should know that not only will he be successful at this moment, but he'll be given a general bracha in life. And that is, what's the biggest bracha? That's the Yivnei Bayis Nachem B'Yisrael. He's going to build a proper a house amongst the Jewish people. The Yiska Loyal of Ad Oilam, and that chus of partaking in battle properly will be given, passed down to the future generations forever. The Yiska L'Chaya Oilam Haba. Shenemar, as it says, Ki Osoy Yasa La Hashem La Adoini Ba'isneman. Why? For what chus? Ki Molchamo is Hashem Adoini Nilcham, and therefore V'Ra Aloisi Matzebecha Mi Yomecha. And then it says further regarding the future, the eternity. Let's go move it. Perek Ches, guys, Perek Ches now speaks about unique rules that are applicable during the battle. Particularly, a lot of time will be spent learning about the Eishes Yefas Toyer, as the Rambam will explain. We have 11 halachas in Perek Ches. We're going to be learning dinim that we have in Chulun Daf Yud Zayin, that they can eat reifa food, Erev in Daf Yud Zayin, and primarily Kedushin Daf Chav Aleph, Daf Chav Beis. Says the Rambam Halacha Aleph. Chalutz Eitzov, army troops, once they already enter into our enemy's territory, and and we are conquering, taking captives, at that moment, if we don't have kosher food, not dechuya, not pikuach nefesh, hutra, mutar lahem lechol, the soldiers are allowed to eat neveles and trefes, ubasar chazir, uchayoytzeboy. Now, the Rambam is making it clear, if you have in your food, the army packets of food, then eat a kosher. But if there is no food and you're in the middle of battle at that moment, imra'av, if you're hungry, and you have no other food, but at that time, mutar. Similarly, you can drink yain nesach if you're thirsty, and that's what you have available. How do we know that? Because from oral tradition, when it says in Pashas V'aschanan that we're going to enter at its Canaan, and we're going to find ubatim milayim koltuv, we're going to find houses filled with all goods. So God told Moshe, what am I referring to? That soldiers during battle can consume, can benefit from that which the houses are filled with. What are the houses filled with? Non-kosher food. And Balashon Chazal, even if arfei chazerim, if you find the necks of chazerim, you can eat it. How do you know you can eat it? The Rambam doesn't quote the hemshech of that verses v'achalta v'savat halacha beis. You see, the Rambam puts everything in the bigger picture context. So in that context, now we're going to go to Eishes Yefas Toyar, Parshas Kiseitze. Yes, Parshas V'aschanan. A soldier within certain restrictions, as the Rambam will specify, is allowed to engage in a sexual relation once with one woman, even though she didn't yet convert. If his yetzer overwhelms him with desire. However, you can't have a relation in the place where he encounters her, meaning out there in the open. Even the first time, he has to enter a bias. Now, basically, he just conquered that house, but in a private place. As it says, number two, restriction number two is only one time. Until she's going to get, if he will marry her, as we'll see, after she will convert, as we'll see.
Married or single, Rabbi? Applies to both?
Married doesn't make a difference.
Married or single?
Wait, doesn't make a difference, but the Rambam will go through every prat. Halacha Gimel.
Is there anywhere else where a person gets her heart takes over and we're allowed to use it?
No, only over here. Halacha Gimel. Ein eshes yefastoyer muteres. She's only permitted el b'shas hashivya while she's in captivity. Shenemar, as it says, v'reisa b'shivya eshes yefastoyer. Now, whom bein psula, kevan, bein bo'ula, bein eshes ish. The Rambam explains why is that. A technical issues. As far as a Jew is concerned, a Jew may never be other than in this exception of it with a non-Jewish woman. But married or not doesn't give her the status of an Eishes. Now we're going to see when we're going to learn in the next chapter, God willing, today, that the goyim that are commanded in Arroyos, 6 Arroyos, one of the 6 is Eishes. That means for a non-Jew, someone else's wife is considered a married wife. But as far as a Jew is concerned, since the goyim don't undergo kiddushin and nesuyim the way we do, from our perspective, she's not called married. Doesn't make a difference other than in the scenario. A Yid can never be with a non-Jewish woman, but in our case where he's allowed to, the fact that she's married is not of any significance because halachically she's not considered as an Eishes Ish for a Jew. Weiter. When it says v'chashakta that he will desire her, so it teaches the Rambam Torah Shabbat Pem afal pisha ene yafa. In other words, al tam v'reach ein lehis vakeach. You say, in other words, if he desires her for whatever reason, ba comes the teacher only with one. When it says quoting v'lakachta l'chala isha, so it means he can't take 2. I know we just said he can only be with one, but a man can take 2, one for him, one for someone else. Can't do that. Either to his father or to his brother. Now, when the Rambam said before that he may not have a relation with her out there in the open, the word yilchatzena means to pressure her, but in context here it means he cannot have that relation. B'mulchama means in the battlefield, because it says v'havesa, you got to bring her into the house. In other words, yachnisena l'makom panoi, and only then can you have the one act of be'ilah. Halacha daled. Kohen is allowed to a Eishes Yefastoya, having this first relation, even though, as we'll see in a moment, normally there's a whole procedure how this man, now that he had a relation, under certain conditions, should marry her. The Kohen will never be allowed to marry her. Number one, none of us can ever be, other than in this case, with a non-Jewish woman. On top of that, she's going to convert. A Kohen cannot marry a Geyotis. But still, the first time he's allowed to be with her. In other words, and therefore, the logic of God, by allowing it under these circumstances, you can't tell a Kohen, you can't, because we're speaking about someone whose Yetzer is overcoming, and so you have to channel it. You don't have the koyach while someone is in battle to tell the person to skafia. I never was in battle too, so that's the way it is. When you're in battle and your life is on line and you're killing people or getting killed, at that moment, that's the way you manage your Yetzer Hara, by not saying no, by saying only like that. Okay. But the Kohen will never be allowed to marry her. Achar came. Why? Because she will have to become a convert in a case of a Yisrael, and a Kohen cannot marry a Geyotis. Halacha hey. Ketzadin Yisrael be a fastoyer achar she yivaleno be a rishayna he begay yusa. She had a relation with her. She's still a non-Jewish woman. So here we go. So I know the pasuk speaks about her staying in this home for 30 days. The Rambam says, 1 second. If she right away agrees to convert, then we take her to the mikvah l'shem gedus, and she does not need to undergo the nivul that the pasuk speaks about, of her growing her nails, of her cutting her hair. She doesn't have to do that. She doesn't do that. Now, by the way, even though she won't have to undergo the nivul, he will never be allowed to marry her for 3 months, because the din of havchana, that if a woman was allowed to be with a man prior to you, is always going to be the same. We have to wait 3 months. Say that, but the nivul she doesn't have to undergo. But the im like kibla, but if she won't right away agree to convert, now again, even though again there's going to be a 90-day, at least a 90-day period of waiting to marry her, but the first 30 of the 90 days, that's the psukim in Kisei. Teisha beveisa shleishim yoim. Shnei as it says, during the time she mourns over the fact that she is going to be abandoning her faith, the ain moina, and he cannot prevent her from crying. She gets to vent all of her sadness during those 30 days. Umegadela says for now she must leave her nails without cutting them, which makes her look unattractive. She must cut the hair of her head, which makes her look unattractive, purposefully because we are hoping that he at that time will lose his desire to marry her, which is the ideal. She must be with him. She's not letting herself go over there in front of him. We want for him not to want to marry her. In other words, he must be patient with her for 30 days. Waiting for her to agree to convert. Now, if after 30 days in Kiblam, and guys, this is important, she also needs to accept marrying him. She's not being, in other words, she can always say, I don't want to marry you. But if she accepts to convert and she wants to marry him after 30 days, then she's misgayeres, v'teiveles k'chol. That Rambam doesn't even have to mention it here because he's relying for us to remember, and then you have to wait another 2 months to marry her.
What if they have a kid?
We'll see in a moment. Very good. We'll see in a moment. We're going to say the Rambam is going to speak everything. Everything is written. Halachavav. Now, I'm sorry. The Rambam writes it here. There's going to be a minimal of 3 months, 1 month of bechia, ushnei chadashim achrov. And let me just add a detail. When the Rambam wrote in Halacha Hey, which is beautiful because that you don't see in the written Torah, that if on the battlefield after the bia she says, "I'll convert, I'll marry you," you don't have to go the month of nivul. You also have to wait 3 months. She converts, and you wait 3 months. And then he has to marry her the way you marry any Jewish woman, by giving her ksuba through kiddushin. But the im like chafetz ba, if after she converts, she doesn't want to marry him, if he does not desire her, the Rambam writes, if he doesn't want, mishalcha lenafsha. What happens if he gives up during this time? He has to send her free. And furthermore, she was taken as a captive, and maybe he has the right to sell her as a slave. No, if he sells her, as it says, not only can you not sell her to someone else, you cannot make her be your servant. Can't make any use of her because he had the first sexual relation with her. And furthermore, if he did sell her, it's not a binding sale, and he must return the money. Furthermore, if he's going to keep her for himself as a servant, so from when he begins to make use of her, he's violating a negative commandment, as it says, don't make use of her, meaning furthermore, what happens if she, in other words, if she converts, but he doesn't want to marry her, she doesn't want to marry him, the Rambam is not in the front, she has to be sent free. What happens if she doesn't want to convert? So here, even though the nivul is only something for 30 days, but you give a full year to see maybe she'll change her mind. Then he must be patient with her for an entire 12 months. If still she doesn't want to convert, now what the Rambam is writing now is going to be, now we're going to go into a big broad din, that we are obligated to see to it that all of the goyim that live under our control are mekabel sheva mitzvos b'nei noach. And if not, really, we have to, they lose their lives. So she will be included in that category. If she doesn't want to convert, fine. But she has to be mekabel sheva mitzvos shenestavu b'nei noach, and then he must set her free. And once a non-Jew accepted the sheva mitzvos b'nei noach, they have the right to live in the Holy Land, and they are called the ger toshav. She's a resident alien, entitled to settle in the land if she wants. And just to know that no goyim are allowed to live in Israel if they're not mekabel sheva mitzvos b'nei noach.
How do you implement that?
but we'll see later. I mean, there were courts that we had. Same way we implement on Yidden. If he doesn't keep Shabbos, the same way. The Eino Noisa Oisa, but he doesn't marry her. He can't marry her. Why? Because she didn't convert. Now, who asked the question, what happens if she got pregnant from the first sexual relation? So the din is that child is a bona fide non-Jew. And even though he will see to it that the child is converted, the child will undergo giyur, like all of the dinim, a giyur of a katan, the child will be considered a bona fide gen. Even though the father is Jewish, we paskin, if the mother is not Jewish, the child is not Jewish and now a convert. And katan, Gershon is guy, and katan shenoi lodami, which means halachically they're not related. The einoi benoi lodavim in advanim. Why? Even though the first relation was permitted, doesn't make a difference. Ella, Beizin Matbil and Oisoi, Al Daitom. Kedin, like we said, any ger katan who doesn't have a father. Wow. In other words, since it's not a son, the child that's converted is not converted by this man. He's not the father. So the Bezdin's responsibility is it to undergo, to see to it that he converts. And therefore,
so it's not his son and it's not her son?
It's not his son and not her son.
And
that's why she's a ger, he's a ger. And
right,
that's why
the mother's still a guy.
The mother is still a guy, correct.
Wow.
And even if the mother would have converted, doesn't make a difference. Since this Abram from the Bia prior to her converting, it's a bona fide gen, and therefore Tamar. Remember the story, the tragic story. Amnon, right? David HaMelech's eldest son, he fell in love with Tamar. Now you should know that Tamar Bia Rishonin Shal Yifas Toyer Hois. That's why, even though David HaMelech was Tamar's father. And it's correct to say that Amnon and Tamar were brothers and sisters, but really, halachically, they were not. And Avshalom, who was Tamar's biological brother, Noilad Ma'achad Nisuyin. Nimser comes out that Tamar Achois Avshalom Mi'imoi, and yet, and Muteres Linasila Amnon, because of the dinners, is that Tamar was a bona fide Giyoidis. And that's like why that prior terrible story, Amnon fell in love with her. Crazy, he became sick. And then ultimately he schemed a plan and he was about to rape her, which he tragically did. But prior to him raping her, Tamar told Amnon, if you want me, ask the king, which is our father. He's not going to tell us we can't get married because halachically they were allowed to get married. And he didn't listen to that, and then he raped her, and then he was filled with hatred towards her, and all of the tragedy that came afterwards. Halachates. If the Yefastoyer doesn't want to abandon her practices of idol worship after Shnei Mas and Chaydish, Harganaisa. Again, this is not unique to a Yefastoyer. This is any non-Jew who's under Adrominium. We may not allow them to practice Avodah Zarah, and if they do, like if they break any of the Shalom Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, they are put to death. Going back to what we learned yesterday, but is aside of them becoming subservient, both in Abdus and in taxes. Which is really they have to be makabel all of the Shavah mitzvahs, but we're focusing here on Avodah Zarah. And via Abdul Kol Mekon Yisrael, they have to destroy all their places of worship. Via Kabul Shana mitzvah shenestava b'nei Noach, because Shekol Goy shelekibel mitzvahs shenestava b'nei Noach horgen oisai im yesh leitachas yodeinu halacha yud. Now, guys, we're having a shtickle intro to Parakim Tes and Yud, which are the Parakim of Shavah mitzvahs. Says Rambam. 613 are given only to the Jewish people, as it says, to who? Only to the Kehillah of Yaakov. And we never force people to convert. If someone wants to convert, then they become bona fide Jews, like it says, Kochem, Kaget, we become the same. If someone does not want to become a Yid, in other words, even this woman, you can't force her to be Mekabel Torah mitzvahs. However, that's only concerning the Tayag mitzvahs. But we should know that Moshe Rabbeinu commanded us on behalf of God Almighty that we are commanded to force Kol Boya Olam Lekabel Kol Mitzvah Shenistavu B'nei Noach. Wow. And after the Rebbe words it, that the Rambam writes this prior to the final halachas of Mashiach, because in history, prior to the coming of Mashiach and as a hachana to the coming of Mashiach, we have to roll up our sleeves and get involved lachuf kol baya olam, to keep the Sheva mitzvahs. And the Rebbe always, when he quoted the word lachuf means bedarkei noyam ubedarkei sholem, because the goal is to be effective, and you are effective when you force in a peaceful and in a pleasant way. But that's our mission. And if someone ultimately does not accept the Sheva mitzvahs and they are under our control, they are called a ger toishav. Whenever you read the words ger toishav, it refers to someone who was makabel Sheva mitzvahs. And guys, bisman she'ein hayovel noyeg, we don't accept them formally in front of a beis din, but when we do, I mean, whenever we are actually accepting the ger toishav, it's done in front of a beis din. The beis din should be of 3 chaverim, 3 talmidei chachamim, and that's that. Now, the Rambam writes another category. So until now we spoke about Yidden and about Goyim. Yidden have to keep the Taryag, and we have to also lachuf. The way the Rebbe taught us how to do lachuf. We have an obligation lachuf all of the peoples of the world to be mekabel Sheva mitzvahs b'nei noyach. The third category is a person who decided to become Jewish when they are in the process of conversion. Even prior to them converting, they're in a different category. That's the way I understand from the Rambam. But during that period of time, and by the way, there's a mitzvah of Avas Hager. Many Yerushalayim say, Avas Hager, why is there a mitzvah to love a ger? A ger is a Yid, Avas Yisrael. Some people say, on top. Some people say, no, the mitzvah of Avas Hager means is that all of the people, while they are in the process of converting, there's a special mitzvah to love them. But at that point, they can retract. They can change their minds. That's what the Rambam is saying. That if a person was makabel to do a bris milah, I understand if a person says, I want to be makabel the taryag mitzvahs, I'm going to do a bris milah. But 12 months passed and he didn't do a bris milah, then he's no longer in this third category of someone in the process of converting. Hareza kimin o umais. Gavaldik. Right. Halacha Yudal of the final halacha. Let's get moving. Kol hamakabel sheva mitzvahs. Whoever undertook to keep the Sheva mitzvahs and the Nizar last lesson, and they actually do it, that's called the chassid of the nations of the world. Here the Rambam, the Rebbe always quoted this, writes that it's not enough for them to be makabel and to keep it, but they have to have the kavana that God gave them the Sheva mitzvahs. They're keeping it not because it makes sense, which it does. They're keeping it because this is God's command. When are you considered a Hasidic Olam? She kabel oisam v'yaso oisam v'pnei shetziva behem HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'Torah. And v'hoidiyonu al dei Moshe Rabbeinu. By the way, this already implies another detail that they acknowledge that it's alluded to in the written Torah, as we'll see in the next chapter a little bit. It's merumas in the Torah Shebachsav, but they are mekabel the emes of Torah Shebal Peh, and God commanded the goyim to keep it through whom? Through Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu let us know that from times immemorial, they were commanded to keep it. In other words, what are we excluding? But if they do it because they intellectually came to that conviction that you got to keep it. And he's not considered Mechassidei Umas Ha'olam. Guys, there's two versions. One version is, and he's not even considered from the Chachamim of Umas Ha'olam. The other version is, he's considered a Chacham, a wise person. He came to the understanding, or she came to the understanding that, it's a social contract. You can't have a world that's not going to function under the rules of Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. But in order for us to fulfill our mission and for them to fulfill their mission of being mekabelit, they have to be mekabelit because it's written in the Torah and because it was given over to them through the oral Torah through Moshe Rabbeinu. And now let's start Pedig Test. Pedig Test is going to be the first of 2 chapters that's specified that go through the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach in the Klal and in the Prat. A lot of what we're learning now is based on Midrashim, Bereshis Rabbah, Shmois Rabbah, but the sugya in Shas Bavli is Sanhedrin, Daf Nun Vav, Daf Nun Zayin. We just learned it recently over here. We have 14 chapters. Let us start. Says Rambam Al Shisha Devarim Nestavo Adam Arish. God Almighty commanded Adam is Adam and Chava, for the following 6. Al Avodah Zarah, V'al Birchas Hashem not to blaspheme, V'al Shvichas Damam not to murder, V'al Gili Arois not to commit adultery, V'al Gazel not to steal, V'al Adinim and to establish a judicial system. Even though, guys, that God, how do we know that? First of all, Moshe Rabbeinu told us that God told him. Number 1. Number 2, Vadas Noitolahem, like we said at the end of last chapter, it also logically you can come to these dinim. Also, this is important. In other words, it's part of the oral Torah and it's hinted to in the written Torah. Michlal divrei Torah yeirah. If you're going to read the words of the Torah, You'll see how it's alluded in there. Sha'al elu nitztavu. And all these psukim, as we Gemara in Sanhedrin, this psukim in the Bereshis, psukim in Parshas Noach. Further, Hoysev lo Noach, God added to the 6. When it came to Noach, and that's after the flood, the additional one, Eber min achai, the prohibition of eating a flesh or a limb that was taken off an animal when it was still alive. Shenemer, as it says, and again, that Rambam at least is writing one remes in the pasuk, ach basar benafshe gomer lo yisei chelo, which means when it's still the soul is in the animal, you can't eat. That means, now, guys, that means that if you rip off the limb, even if after you ripped off the limb, and 2 minutes later and an hour later, the animal died, since it was removed from the animal when damai benafshe, you can never eat it. So now we have a total nimtzu sheva mitzvahs. We have the 7 mitzvahs. I just want to quote what my teacher Rab Leib, maybe in Miami, just a good simon to remember. That to remember the sheva mitzvahs, it's not in the same order that Rambam wrote it. It's the 3 for which a yid has to give up his life: Yeharik ba'al yavar, avodah zarah, adultery and murder, and then Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet. Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet. Aleph is Eber Menachai. Beis is Birchas Hashem, blasphemy. Gimel is Gezela, Geneva, and Dalet is Din. Now, what the Rambam writes now has to be understood. I'll speak out quickly the problem we'll have, but let's read the words. It's from when God gave Noach the 7th. That was upon all mankind until the times of Abraham. Everyone is obligated to keep the 7 mitzvahs. Well, Abraham, then it's Tava Yasar al Elu Bamila. But that was not for all the peoples. That was for Abraham and his descendants. And he, on his own, began to daven shachris. Comes along Yitzchak, the Hitrish Meiser. With all the kashas that people ask, we know from the Chumash that Avraham Avinu gave Meiser, right, to Malkei Sholem. The concept of Meiser Mamoin comes from Yitzchak. That 10% of everything that you have, you give, comes from Yitzchak. And also, Yitzchak, v'hoisef tefillah acheres l'fnois hayirim. Even though we have once in Chazal, in the Gemara, that Avraham Avinu daven mincha. But as Tosfos pointed out, that after Yitzchak instituted mincha, Avraham Avinu daven mincha. The Yaakov hoisef, the prohibition against eating the Gid Hanosha, and Yaakov began to daven ma'ariv. Furthermore, in Egypt, Nitztava Amram and Mitzvahs Yiseiris. The Rambam doesn't write which ones they were. Moshe Rabbeinu v'nishlema Torah al Yodei, and the Torah was completed. The big kasha Rabbi Yosef Engel asks, and everyone else asks, is that the Rambam writes so strongly in his Agdama L'Peresh HaMishnayos that we don't keep any of the mitzvahs because they were commanded prior to the Matan Torah, whether it was to Avram, whether it was to Yaakov Agid Anasha. We keep all of the mitzvahs because God commanded it to Moshe, to the Yidden on Har Sinai. So we have to better understand why the Rambam is writing it, for what purpose. But that's the issue here. But let's move on. It's late. Halacha base. Now, what we're going to have from here, basically until the end of this chapter, is to understand one nekuda. There's one theme that the 7 we counted, but the details of the 7 don't follow the same details that the Yidden have. We also may not serve Avodah Zarah. The Goyim's prohibition against Avodah Zarah doesn't have to be the same. Without going into the whole question whether Shituv is problematic, even if it's not problematic, it's only for a Goy. And you'll see by every single one of the 7, the details by Bnei Noach is different. So they have their own Torah, and the Rambam is going to go through all the details. So let's go. Ben Noach Shavar Avodah Zarah Harei Zechayev, providing that he serves that idol the way that idol is normally worshipped, right? So if Hamafayir Labal Pa'oir, he'll be Chayev because that's Kedarko. There's an additional law, that's the Yiddish law, that if a Jew, God forbid, worships an idol in any one of the 4, you guys remember the 4? He's bowing down, sacrificing, burning incense, pouring libations. Even if that's Shaloi Kedarko, you're still going to be Chayev. Here, the same for the Goy. If he is going to be put to death, the Goy will be put to death. I just want to give out one other detail. Whenever a Jew is put to death, we just learned this recently in Rambam, we have Arba Misos, right? Skila, Sreifa, Hereg, and Chenek. By Goyim, whenever they're put to death, there's only one type of Misa, as we'll see. And the details will be different. Like, for example, God forbid, if a Jew is going to hug, and that's not the way that the Goyim worship it. And that's why Yidden will not be put to death. Also, here we are alike. Yet, says Rambam, but a Goy cannot do anything that shows his love, adoration, or service, or subservience to an idol. We don't allow for goyim to erect a monument. Guys, monuments may not be erected. The monuments were made to gather people around. And even if they are gathering around to be in reverence of God, the way the Muslims build that matzeva, wherever that is, that's something that no one is allowed to build. Goyim included. They may not plant a tree that's planted for idols. They may not even make images. We're speaking about protruding images of the form of man, even if they're making them lenoi and not for worship. These are all pratim. Let's go to the next one, blasphemy. So whether he used God's Shem whether he used any other word that's in reference to God, he'll be chayiv misa. And here the Rambam points out, Masha'en can be Yisrael. As we know, a Yid is only chayiv misa b'shem ha'meyuchad. Halacha dalet. Ben Noach sharek es hanefesh. Again, details where we're the same, details where we're different. If a Ben Noach kills another person, even if a Ben Noach aborts a fetus that's still in the womb of the mother, Rambam writes, he's put to death on it. You should know if a Yid, God forbid, aborts, kills a ubar, the Jew is not killed, even though the Jew violated leitirtzah. But he's pointing out details where we don't follow exactly the same. If a goy killed someone who was so ill that he or she would not have lived for a year, or even if the goy did not kill them directly, but Jimmy bound up someone else and he put him in front of a lion, that person couldn't get out. So the lion ate him. He only caused him to get killed. Or if he left him in a place where he was starving to death and he didn't make sure no food is given to him. He caused death. Nerag, the one who did it, is put to death. If someone is pursuing, A is pursuing B. B has the right to defend himself. B, if need be, can kill A. But if B, who could have shot him in the leg, shot him in his heart. Nerag Olav. And this din is not true by Yisrael. And again, I want you to know, it doesn't mean that a Yid is allowed to do that, right? A Yid who could have saved his life by shooting someone in the legs and shot him in his heart is called a shoifach damim. He's not killed in a human court. Just to make that clear, all of these details, it doesn't mean that the Yid is allowed to do it or the Goy is allowed to do it. We're speaking about the details of when do you put them to death in a basin and when don't you. Halacha 5. Now, this is amazing. For those people who are learning Yevamis, you learned in the beginning, how many aroyas do we have? And then on top of the aroyas, you have the shniyos. By Goyim, there are 6 aroyas. They can't commit adultery, but what does that include? Much less than what's included for a Yid. Including, we mentioned in the last Pedic, Eishes Ish. For Goyim, Eishes Ish is one of the aroyas. Sheish aroyas asur fal b'nei noach. What are the 6? It's amazing. By the Yidden, it's so much about paternal, right? Biblically. Here, by them, it's maternal. Their mother, their father's wife, any married woman. A married woman for another Goy is called a married woman. Maternal sister, male, and an animal, ubehema. And now, again, the importance here is not only to know the tradition that God told Moshe, but to find the remes in the pasuk. Shenema, when it says, now we're going back to the beginning, Bereshis, because Panoach we only added Ever Menachai. So we're saying that the psukim that we have in the beginning that are meramas to the 6 stand today. When it says Al Ken Yaziv Ish Es Aviv, leave your father. You're never with your father. It means you may not be with your father's wife, even if she's not your mother. Then when it says in the next works, quoting Ve'esimoy, Kemashma, when it says V'davak Be'ishtoi, cleave to your wife, that excludes Be'eshes Chavedri. Be'ishtoi, not the V'davak, Be'ishtoi, woman and not in a male. V'hoy Labasar Echad means we can only be with someone with whom we can create children. And that excludes a relation with a behema, with a chayiv, with a oiv, shehein hu behem basar echad. Rashi writes, because we cannot create children together. The Nema, and since it says that Avram Avinu, who told whether it was to Parai, later to Avimelech, that achoisi bas avihi, ach loy bas imi, and therefore I married her. From what do we see over there? That the prohibition of sister is only on maternal sister. Paternal sister, they are allowed to marry, even though she actually was a niece. But from the psukim, there is a remes that the isur of a achos for a ben noach is only maternal. Unlike by Yidden. Ben Noach chayiv al mafutas aviv v'anusas aviv. In other words, when you say that he can't have a relation with his mother, even if his mother was not married to his father, according to the Goyish laws of marriage, but the father had a relation with a woman, he seduced her, or God forbid, he raped her, still, also, a man may not have a relation, a goy cannot have a relation with his father's wife, even if it's not his mother, even after his father passes away. The issur of homosexuality is whether that other man is a minor or an adult, even though the other, if it's a minor, won't be punished. But the adult, chayiv misa, ala behema, and the issur of having a relation with an animal is whether the animal is kana ben gedolah. When it comes to an animal, even though by a yid, right, if a yid, God forbid, has a relation with the animal is put to death. That's not so by bnei Noach. These details, again, this is only by goyim, only if he had a relation kedarka. And when after she had a relation with her husband. By a yid, marriage is after chuppah, not or after kedushin, really, for the issur of getting ashes ish. Here, she has to actually have had a relation with her husband, and the adulterer did a relation kedarka. If she's engaged, or even if she went into the chuppah, this non-Jewish woman with her non-Jewish husband, but she did not yet have a relation, ein chayav and aleha. It's not that it's okay, God forbid, but the issur of getting killed is not here. Shenamar, as it says, v'hi bu'ulas bo'al. If you have a big goy that comes on a Yisraelis, there the way we define a bia from my mishkevei, right? Mishkevei lashanaben. Ben kedarka ben shalei kedarka chayiv. Furthermore, if a goy has a relation with a Jewish nara amorasa, even though if he would have had a relation with a non-Jewish nara amorasa, there's no death penalty. Here there is a death penalty. And what's the death penalty? The way a yid would have gotten put to death. Niskal Akademi Yisrael. So it's a good trivia question. Normally, Bnei Noach are always killed b'sayev. Here's a case where Ben Noach will be killed b'skila. Even though, so again, if she would have been an Ashes goy, there would be no death penalty. But here, chenek, again, not b'sayev. Harei bechenek Kedini Yisrael. But the moment a goy will have a relation al Ashes Yisrael achar shenivalam, so now she is similar to the non-Jewish woman who's married, meaning she had a relation with her husband. Now, and now the rule is normally that if a goy violates the Sheva mitzvahs, if Ben Noach has a female slave and he designated a male slave to exclusively be with her. So there isn't really marriage, but they are designated to be together. That's considered marriage enough that if a non-Jew has a relation with her, because of Eshes Chaveroi. But here it is interesting, since there are slaves, so it's not just because the slave and the Eved and the Shifcha had once bia together. It has to become public knowledge that everyone who sees this woman says, Zu devis, she's the wife of that Eved. It has to be known that they're married. Now, how do they get unmarried? Just like their halachic marriage doesn't begin with their ceremony. No, it begins with them having a relation. So in the case of a slave and a shivcha, from when she is no longer, right, the master separated her from the slave, and it's public knowledge. How does it become public knowledge? Because even the goyim covered their ears, married woman covered their hair. If this shivcha, now that the master said you're no longer designated to be with that Eved, the Yipara Roisha Bashuk, she goes out with uncovered hair. So now it's known she's no longer married. Furthermore, so if a non-Jew, if their marriage is affected by them being together physically, so how do they affect a divorce for him to be considered a single woman? From when either she leaves the home, either when the husband tells her to leave or when she leaves herself. Because by goyim, there is no such a thing that a document will separate them. It has to be either they're living together or they're not living together. It's not about him telling her to leave. Or only she to separate from each other. That's the way goyim dissolve a marriage. They simply just walk away from each other. Test. Ben noyach chayiv ala gazul. Doesn't make a difference whether he stole from a fellow goy, whether he stole from a yid, whether he did an act of force, a bandit, a armed robber, or whether he did it on the night. He was a ganef, whether he stole money, whether he kidnapped a person, whether he didn't pay his worker. And even a poil, even in cases where if he would have been working, he would have had a permit to eat some of the food that he's working with. But if it wasn't during that time, and all of that is included in Gazlan. And by Yidden, we know so many different types of Gazlanim, but let's move on. Wow. And furthermore, someone else steals that from the Ganef. Unlike by Yidden, that sometimes you say, the second one didn't steal it. Let's go back. Or he's not going to be chayiv the punishment, the knas. There's no such a difference by going. Halacha yud. The chayiv al ever menachai. Ever menachai means a limb that has on it sinews and meat, right? Basar, gidim, and atzamais. And he's also chayiv just for basar menachai, just meat. How much? By Yidden, what's normally the din? Kazayis. By a goy, there's no shiyurim. Even b'chol shu. Shalei nitnu hashiyurim eloli Yisrael bulvad. And a goy is allowed to have blood that left a living animal. Unlike Yidden, that we are never allowed to have blood. Whether it is the prohibition is whether he's having a limb or he's having habasara punishment of what about the limb that was ripped off a living foul bird? Says Ramam. So says the Rambam. Halacha Yud Beis. Even if you shechted both of the simanim, the trachea and the esophagus, as long as the animal is still it's still convulsing. So the din is if a limb was ripped off, a goy may never eat it. By a yid, it's not so. A yid can cut a piece of meat off. The yid cannot eat it as long as the animal is living. But once the animal dies, since the meat was removed after shechita for a yid, it's mutter. Halacha Yud Gimel. Kol she'asur al Yisrael mishum ever menachai. Anything that's asur on a yid is asur for a yid. However, not the other way around, like we just mentioned. And guys, for Yidden, it's not that way. In other words, the whole idea of Enis or Halal Isur, that we have the rule that only Kol Shabasarei Mutar, right, which means a min toid, only there was the Yid commanded not to have an Evi Menachai. If the species is not permitted, of course it's asur, but it's not under the category of Evi Menachai. Another day, the Eved Basar Pershim and Ambar Chesses. Afal Pisha Shachat by Yisrael Shnei Asimanim. That's the whole Gemara. What happens if an animal was shechted for a yid? And a yid, this animal, not an animal that had shechita, an animal that is a mintahaira, it was slaughtered for a yid. Even though, again, if a piece of meat was cut off for a Jew, you only have to wait for the animal to fully die and then eat it. That's okay. And the final halacha Yudalit. Okay, dinim. What type of judicial system, or what are the parameters? At least in every major city, there has to be a court, and what will be the base of their rules? In order for them to pass judgment and to admonish and to educate and to see to it that everyone keeps the other 6 mitzvahs. The rule is Yehareg B'Sayif, even though we had today 2 exceptions. The Rambam again adds a detail. Why is it that all of the inhabitants of Shechem, why were they killed out by Shimon and Levi? Because they were Chayav Misa. How were they Chayav Misa? Only one rape dina, Sharei Shechem Gaza. He's starting just with the act of he stole her. And Vehem Ro, V'Yadu. And since they did not bring him to justice, all of them were Chayav Misa. Now, other details of their judicial system. Even with only 1 aid. Ben Noach could be put to death even with only 1 dying. All of the dinim of Asra are not for Ben Noach. And it can even be through a relative, both the aid or the dying. Remember that? In Parshas Noach where it says, Miyad ish. Remember the Gemara, Miyad ish, Miyad isha. And v'loitadon isha lohem, but a woman may never be a judge for them. God willing, to be continued. Wow. So guys, just know tomorrow's the final learning. We have the way that Rambam is divided. There's 339 shiurim of 3 prakim each, including the Hagdama. Tomorrow we're going to have Sheva Mitzvahs and the 2 prakim connected to Geula and Mashiach, 2 separate chapters as we will learn.
Ugh.